Hello guys, this is your fanfic dojo and we are back with our new fanfic, which is What If Naruto Flew at Young Age and Met Trio of the Sand Part 1. And if you enjoy this fanfic, then please press the like button and please subscribe to the channel. It motivates me to upload more fanfic like these for you all. Now let's start the fanfiction. Give the scroll to me, Naruto. Naruto, you can't let him have it. Uzumaki Naruto's mind was consumed by a torrent of conflicting thoughts and emotions as he turned back and forth between the two speakers. The first, Mizuki-sensei, was smirking down at him from a high tree branch, while Iruka-sensei, the second speaker, was pinned to the wall of a small wooden shed by several kunai, one of which was buried deep into his right leg. The whole day had seemingly gone from bad to worse. After failing his genin exam for the third time that morning, Naruto had fallen into a deep depression until Mizuki had come to him with a secret. He'd said that if Naruto managed to steal the village's scroll of secret techniques and learn them, he'd still be able to become a genin. He succeeded in getting the scroll, and then after practicing for a while, managed to master the first technique right before Iruka had shown up. For some reason, he'd seemed awfully surprised when Naruto had told him about Mizuki's special test. But now everything seemed to be falling apart. Listen to me, Naruto, Iruka begged while prying the kunai from his leg. Mizuki tricked you into stealing the scroll so he could take it for himself. The whole test was just a sham. Mizuki laughed. Don't listen to a word he says, Naruto. He's just scared. You can see it in his eyes. He pointed toward his fellow Chunin just to prove his point. He doesn't want you to have that scroll because he doesn't want you getting stronger. Naruto's eyes widened. What? He turned back to Iruka, who in turn was still glaring up at Mizuki. In fact, he continued. Neither Iruka, the Hokage, nor anyone else in this entire village even want you to become a genin. That isn't true, Mizuki. Iruka shouted. Oh, isn't it? He asked mockingly. Then tell me, Iruka, why has the final test for the genin exam these last 3 times been Bunshin no Jutsu when you know full well that it's Naruto's worst technique? That's not the reason. Mizuki gave him another mockingly shocked look. It's not. Well, what other reason could you have for continuously using Bunshin no Jutsu for the final test when there are several other techniques that could be used instead? Henge. Kuwarimi. Hell, we've even passed students for performing a simple Shunshin no Jutsu in the past. And here you will stand there and say that you have no ulterior motives for targeting only Naruto's weakness among all the students. Naruto could feel chills running up and down his body from the way the conversation was going. Iruka may have been harder on him than most of the other students, but he wouldn't have blatantly tried to keep him from becoming a ninja. Would he? The look on Iruka's face showed of barely repressed guilt. But, no, he still couldn't believe it. It was only yesterday that Iruka had taken him out for ramen. That had probably been the nicest thing that anyone had ever done for him in his whole life. Why would he do that unless he already knew that Naruto was going to fail his exam and was just trying to cheer him up beforehand? Naruto was thinking so much he almost missed the rest of the conversation that was still going on. The only reason I treat Naruto harder than the others is because he has the lowest marks in the academy, Iruka answered. I have to make sure that he's fully ready to become a ninja before I pass him or he'll just be in over his head. Mizuki suddenly turned very serious. And you're saying that it has absolutely nothing to do with your parents, Iruka? A look of pain washed over Iruka's face, while one of bewilderment appeared on Naruto's. Parents? What do I have to do with them? Don't say a word, Mizuki. Iruka demanded. You know the law. Law? Naruto wondered silently. Now there was some sort of law he didn't know about. Why was everything so confusing all of a sudden? Naruto could feel a headache, as well as a strange pain in his abdomen, starting to build. Naruto, Mizuki said quietly after a slight pause. How many times have you had to ask yourself, what have I done? What did I ever do to make an entire village hate me? I imagine it must have been many times, because we both know that their hatred runs much deeper than the results of a few harmless pranks, correct? Mizuki. Iruka shouted. Shut up. Mizuki spat. Why should Naruto be the only one left in the dark? Doesn't he deserve to know the truth? But the Hokage. You want to know the truth, don't you, Naruto? Mizuki asked, ignoring Iruka's continued pleas. The need to sort out all of the confusing thoughts in his head coupled with the natural curiosity of a young boy made Naruto immediately start nodding his head. Yes, tell me. I won't let you, Iruka yelled, sprinting forward and up the tree to where Mizuki stood. Mizuki watched, chuckling lightly as Iruka grabbed a kunai and slashed at his face. Before it could make contact, he blocked with a kunai of his own and sent a sharp kick into Iruka's injured knee, following it with a fast jab to his chin. The scar-faced Chunin let out a croak of pain as he lost his initial balance and tumbled unceremoniously to the ground. Iruka-sensei, Naruto called to his fallen teacher. He moved forward to see if he was okay but was cut off when Mizuki landed in front of him. He took a small step back before the older man placed a firm hand on his shoulder. Naruto, 12 years ago a nine-tailed demon fox attacked the village. The fox killed over 100 villagers, 2 of which were Iruka's parents. Naruto struggled to hold down the growing nervousness inside him, but was unable to keep himself from shivering. So, what's that have to do with me? I mean, I know about the Kyuubi. He attacked the village and the Yondaime sacrificed himself to kill it. Not kill, Naruto, Mizuki corrected, letting a small grin form on his face. Seal. The Kyuubi was sealed away, within the body of a newborn child. His shaking grew worse, his subconscious already beginning to understand before the rest of his mind. Newborn. You, Naruto. Time seemed to stand still for Naruto upon hearing those words. Demon. Realizing he didn't even seem capable of rational thought anymore, he simply turned his gaze to the ground below him, lost in a trance as all of the pieces began to fit themselves together. All the cold glares he received, all of the threats and abuse, both physical and emotional, and the loneliness. Without even thinking, he slowly reached up and placed his hand against his stomach, right where his ugly birthmark was. As much as he wanted to deny it, shout at the top of his lungs that it wasn't true, call Mizuki a liar, deep down he knew it was true. He was still lost in his stupor when Mizuki placed another hand on his other shoulder. I know it's hard to accept, Naruto, but now you know the truth. You carry the Kyuubi inside you. That's why everyone in the village hates you so passionately. That's why Iruka and the others don't want you to succeed as a ninja. And that's why, no matter how hard you work and how deeply you dream, you will never be made the great Hokage and be acknowledged by all your doubters, because no matter what you do, no one is going to see Uzumaki Naruto. All they're going to see is the container of the demon fox that ruined so many of their lives. Each word spoken felt like a knife wound piercing all over Naruto's body, the last part about not becoming a Hokage he felt right in the center of his heart. And that is also why. Mizuki continued softly. I now have to kill you. Before the statement had even registered, Naruto felt a sharp pain in his side as Mizuki kicked him with full force, sending him crashing into the trunk of a tree where he crumpled limply to the ground. A light chuckle escaped the throat of the white-haired traitor. He casually picked up the discarded forbidden scroll with one hand, and grabbed one of the giant shuriken from his back with the other. I can't say that you haven't been very helpful, monster. But I'm afraid that from this point onward you'd just be getting in my way. He began twirling the shuriken over his head. Enjoy your eternal hell, demon. He brought his arm down to let the shuriken fly, but was stopped when a recovered Iruka grabbed his arm, causing the shuriken to sail off harmlessly in the wrong direction. Stop this, Mizuki, Iruka begged, trying to keep all his weight on his one good leg. Why are you doing all of this? Mizuki glared at him in annoyance. For power, Iruka, more than the Hokage would ever allow me to possess. But if you wanted to die first so badly, All you had to do was say so. Pulling out another kunai, he made to slash at his former partner's face, but was countered by Iruka's own kunai. Unfortunately, Iruka once again left himself wide open for another attack on his damaged knee, which Mizuki capitalized upon, and Iruka fell to the ground again, clutching his leg in agony. Mizuki unhooked the second shuriken from his back and stood victoriously over his fallen comrade. I've been hoping for a moment like this for a long time, Iruka. Goodbye. Darkness. The sound of dripping water. A musty feeling in the air. He definitely wasn't in the forest anymore. Opening his eyes, Naruto took in his strange new surroundings. If he wasn't mistaken, he appeared to be in a sewer of some kind. Did Konoha even have sewers? More importantly, what had become of Iruka-sensei and Mizuki-sensei? The last thing he could remember was Mizuki saying he was going to Ki. Am I dead? He asked. He sure hoped not. What sort of afterlife involved a sewer? But on the other hand, it did seem to represent the way his life had turned out, he supposed. Unsure of what to do, he simply began walking through the dingy corridors, hoping that maybe they'd lead to some place a little less stinky. He didn't have to go far before he found himself standing before a gigantic rusty gate, which had a small paper seal attached it. He was about to turn and walk the other way when he suddenly felt an enormous amount of power coming from the other side of the gates. He took a step forward and immediately fell backward when a large animalistic face appeared before him. Well, the creature growled. 12 years together and you finally decide to visit. Naruto stared up in awe of the thing before him. You're the. So I guess the secret's out, huh? It replied in what must have been a mocking tone. You may refer to me as Kyubi-sama, or just master if you prefer. Naruto hung his head. Then it really was true. He could feel tears beginning to creep into his eyes, but fought them down and glared up at the demon fox. It's all because of you that everyone in the village hates me. The Kyubi snorted, an action that almost blew Naruto off his feet. Now that's hardly fair, mortal. Really, do you think I enjoy being trapped inside the body of a loudmouth weakling like you? If you want to blame someone, then blame the guy who stuck me in here. That guy, Naruto knew, had been the Yondaime, the person Naruto had admired for the majority of his life and one of the driving forces behind Naruto deciding to become Hokage himself. But all of the admiration he felt was now being rivaled by the sheer amount of bitterness he was feeling upon learning the truth about himself. Why had the Yondaime picked him? Was it more convenient since he didn't have parents or something? And just in case you're still curious, the fox interrupted his thoughts. We are still alive. And stop with all the self-pitying, it's pathetic, even for you. Besides, it's not like living with me inside you is without advantages. While the being alive part was comforting, Naruto was still growing angrier at the Kyubi. Shut up, Baka Fox. What could you possibly do that could help me? The Kyubi grinned in a way that made him look even more sinister. Perhaps a demonstration is in order. Naruto watched on as a wave of blood-red chakra began pouring through the gates and quickly began to surround his body. Hey, what are you doing? He asked in alarm. Just think of it as a temporary loan, human. My way of paying the rent, you might say. You'll thank me for it later. Naruto could slowly begin to feel himself returning to consciousness. The only thing left of the sewer was the demonic laughter of the Kyubi that faded away behind him. What in the? Mizuki muttered. He had been about to bring his shuriken down onto the body of Iruka, when out of the corner of his eye, he noticed a red aura coming from the body of the fox brat. Iruka, through the searing pain in his leg, noticed it as well. Naruto, he whispered. Naruto silently climbed back to his feet, turning a deathly and feral gaze to Mizuki, accentuated by his now red eyes and more defined whisker marks. Even his canine teeth and fingernails had grown longer and sharper. Neither Chunin moved as they watched the boy adopt an animal-like position on his hands and feet. Mizuki finally shook off his surprise and began spinning his weapon again. I don't know what you're up to, brat, but you're still going to die now. So saying, he sent the shuriken flying towards the boy. What happened next was too quick for the traitor to follow. In the blink of an eye, Naruto had jumped over the shuriken and sprung himself from the tree trunk behind him toward Mizuki. The next thing Mizuki felt was an explosion of pain as Naruto raked him across the face with his claw-like fingernails. He barely had time to cover his face and scream in pain before Naruto rebounded back and drove his foot into the back of his head, sending him into a dark and blissfully painless slumber. Iruka watched the entire exchange, all of which hadn't taken more than 10 seconds, with a look of horror on his face. He didn't know how it was possible, but he knew for a fact that this was not the Naruto that he knew. The eyes, the whiskers, the red chakra, they all told him the same thing. The Kyuubi had taken control of its host. Iruka was now staring at the monster that was responsible for killing his parents. After making certain that Mizuki was not getting back up, Naruto turned to check on Iruka, but froze when he saw him. Instantly, the red aura vanished and his body returned to its normal state. The look that Iruka was giving him was one of unmistakable anger and fear, just like he'd seen every day from almost everyone else he knew. But somehow, it hurt a hell of a lot more seeing it come from Iruka. Without a second thought, Naruto turned and ran into the forest. Iruka's eyes widened in shock. Naruto, wait! He tried to run after him, but was stopped by the pain in his knee. He cursed himself, knowing there was no way he could catch up to the boy now. This is all my fault, he whispered. It was well past midnight when Iruka had returned with the scroll and an unconscious Mizuki. After the entire ordeal was explained to the Hokage and the rest of the shinobi that were present, the Sandaime had issued for everyone to comb the area for Naruto. Now everyone was back in front of the Ninja Academy. No one had seen anything of Naruto, save for a small trail that had led out of the village. When everyone had settled down, Sarutobi Asuma was the first to speak. What do we do about this, Hokage-sama? We have the scroll back and we now know that it was Mizuki who caused all of this, but in regards to the boy himself. A ninja standing directly behind Iruka grunted. Why don't we just leave him go? It'd save the village a lot of trouble. Without warning, Iruka turned and slugged the man in the face. He was quickly restrained by two others before he did further damage. You don't know anything about that boy, he shouted. You'd realize that if you ever bother to look at him and not just the thing that's sealed inside him. Please calm yourself, Iruka, the Hokage told him. I know how you're feeling, but fighting amongst ourselves won't help matters any. If I may, Hokage-sama. Everyone turned to the back where a silver-haired man with 3/4 of his face covered up was slowly approaching. You're late, Kakashi, the Hokage reprimanded. Hitaki Kakashi blinked with his one exposed eye. Well, you see, while out investigating, a single magpie flew by me, so I had to go to a temple and purify myself. Various mutterings of disbelief were heard from the crowd. Please get on with it, Kakashi, the Hokage urged impatiently. Yes, well, all we really have to worry about is finding the boy and explaining things to him. Since Uzumaki Naruto failed to pass his genin exams today, it's not possible for us to label him as a missing nin, because obviously, he's not a ninja yet. That means that once we find him and convince him to come back, there will be no need for any sort of punishment. Iruka grinned widely in relief while the Hokage hid a smile of his own. Leave it to Kakashi to find a loophole like that. I want you all to get some rest, he announced. We'll begin a broader search at sunrise. As everyone began to disperse, Kakashi patted Iruka on the shoulder. Beat up Mizuki all by himself, did he? Seeing Iruka nod, he grinned, or at least it was probably a grin judging by the one eye. No worries, alright. Iruka just nodded again before gazing up at the night sky. I'm really sorry, Naruto. Did you hear? I heard my mom say that Uzumaki Naruto left the village last night. Yeah, me too. He must have been really upset about failing again. Nah, I heard he tried to make off with the Hokage's secret scroll. Hey, for all the good it would, done a loser like him. Yeah, it's not like he was that good a ninja or anything. Still, I don't know why my parents seemed so happy about it. You three pay attention. The three whispering kids shuddered and sank into their chairs as everyone else in the room turned to look at their table. Sorry, Uruka-sensei, they mumbled together. Uruka shook his head and turned back to his clipboard. It was perfectly obvious what the children were talking about. It was the same thing that everyone in the entire village was talking about. The demon child was gone, and if the villagers didn't fear and respect the Hokage as much as they did, the day would have been declared a village holiday. Uruka sighed in frustration, feeling his hands tighten on the clipboard that he held. It had been nearly 4 hours since the Hokage had sent a squad out to search for the missing boy. So far nothing had turned up, and Uruka was becoming more distracted with each passing minute. He'd been finding himself checking the doorway almost every 5 minutes hoping to see someone dragging the rambunctious boy into the classroom like so many times before. He should have been out there looking for him with the others, but unfortunately with Mizuki now gone as well, he was the only one left to run the academy. Naruto's leaving had been his fault, after all. No matter how much the Hokage tried to reassure him otherwise, that it was a compilation of all the rejection and hatred over the past 12 years that had finally caught up with the boy, Uruka still knew that last night it had been him that had driven that final nail into the coffin. Naruto, you need to come back, he pleaded silently. Uruka-sensei. Uruka snapped out of his thoughts. He looked up to see one of the gossiping boys from before with his hand in the air. Is it really true that Naruto left the village and you were the one who stopped him from stealing the Hokage's scroll? The room grew quiet, as the majority of the students who had heard bits and pieces of the incident from their parents perked up, hoping to hear the story from its source. Uruka gave everyone in the room a stern look. Although I have been specifically instructed by the Hokage himself to not discuss anything about this incident, I am going to tell you that even though Naruto has left the village, what you've probably heard about the circumstances behind it is most likely false. And until this incident has been properly settled, I'll tolerate no further questions about it. Understood. Everyone nodded. Good. Now, I will begin dividing you all into your 3-person teams, so listen closely for your names. As Uruka began reading off names, several of the students became lost in their own thoughts. Hyuga Hinata hung her head sadly. Having watched Naruto for a long time now, she knew very well the sort of person he really was. It was true that he was a prankster and a troublemaker, but she saw the hidden agenda behind his actions. If there was any reason why Naruto had left, it certainly hadn't been because he'd tried to steal something. Inuzuka Kiba felt a bit disappointed. He never would have considered Naruto and himself real friends, but they'd had some pretty good times making trouble for Uruka-sensei together. He'd miss having another troublemaker around. The only thing that went through Haruno Sakura's mind was that she wouldn't be bothered by that annoying boy who wouldn't get a clue that she wasn't interested in him. At least she had one less person trying to keep her away from Sasuke-kun. To anyone else, Uchiha Sasuke remained as stoic and as broody as ever, but if one were to look extremely close, they might notice a slight furrowing of the prodigy's brow and a small darkening of his eyes. Guess if he's really gone that makes you the new Dobi, doesn't it, Shikamaru? Akamichi Choji teased between shoveling chips into his mouth. Shikamaru just rolled his eyes and sighed in a bored manner. Team 7, Uruka continued. Uchiha Sasuke, Haruno Sakura. Yada. Sakura cried victoriously while several other girls groaned in despair. Uruka frowned at the sudden outbursts and continued. And Nara Shikamaru. Shikamaru and Choji both looked downcast at finding out they wouldn't be on the same team. When they turned to each other, both forced grins onto their faces. Lucky you, Choji said. Being paired up with the prodigy should make things a lot easier for you. Shikamaru sighed. noticing how Sakura was still giggling and staring starry-eyed at Sasuke. I guarantee it ends up more trouble than it's worth. Hey bum, Yamanaka Ino muttered from the row in front of him. You better keep that billboard brow away from my Sasuke-kun. If I find out anything's going on with them, I'm holding you responsible, understand? Shikamaru just brushed her off before turning back to Choji. Well, at least I wasn't on a team with her. Choji laughed. Yeah, I'll bet that wouldn't be much fun. And finally, Uruka's voice rang out again. Team 10 will be Akamichi Choji. Yamanaka Ino. Choji's head fell to his desk. Shikamaru gave him a sympathetic pat on the shoulder. And a Shizu Taro. Choji and Ino looked to the other side of the room, finding their new teammate sitting at the very edge of the room, idly picking his nose. Feeling their eyes on him, he turned and greeted them with a small wave. Neither of them looked very thrilled. You will all be assigned to your new Junin leaders tomorrow morning, Uruka informed them. For now, you have the rest of the day to yourselves. Good luck to all of you. A few hours later in the afternoon, the Sandaime sat in his office, busying himself with his stack of paperwork when a knock at his door snapped him out of his actions. Enter, he called. The door opened, revealing Shiranui Genma and Namiyashi Rado. What do you have to report? He asked them. The two men saluted and Genma spoke first. Well, Hokage-sama, I'm afraid to say that we've all run into a slight complication in regards to the Kyuubi boy. The Hokage kept his face neutral and cleared his throat to make sure his voice remained level before speaking. What sort of complications are we talking about? Did you find Naruto? The two Junin rubbed the back of their heads in discomfort. Well, here's the thing, Rado said cautiously. The two of us and the others followed the boy's trail for a few miles, when the trail that he was leaving suddenly split off in different directions. Sarutobi frowned. Split off. They nodded. What does that mean, exactly? Well, most likely the boy figured out that the village would be sending people after him, and to throw us off, he created a few cage buncheons to create additional trails for us to follow, hoping it would give him additional time to get away, Rado explained. Impossible. Genma shrugged. I admit it seems strange that a kid like him would be able to think up something as smart as that, but I don't see any. That's not what I mean. Sarutobi said a little louder than intended. Just yesterday Naruto failed his genin exams because he wasn't able to create even one successful buncheon. I watched it myself. Now you're telling me that he's capable of creating cage buncheons. At least 10 at once, actually, Genma informed him, shrugging again. We tracked down a few of them but they all vanished the moment we approached them. The cage buncheon no jutsu is one of the techniques from the scroll that he took last night, Rado commented while rubbing his chin. To learn a Junin level technique like that in the span of about an hour is unheard of. The fact that it was a boy who's not even a genin and was able to make so many of them at once should be, by all accounts, absolutely impossible. What exactly are you thinking here, Rado? Sarutobi asked. The Junin was silent for a few moments, trying to decide how best to approach the subject. Well, Hokage-sama, it's just, well, you remember what Uruka told us last night? How the boy seemed to change when he beat Mizuki. He said he had a red aura and was acting like an animal. Combine that with the fact that he's mastered a technique that should normally take the average ninja a minimum of 3 days to learn in just hours, and I have to wonder. You're thinking that perhaps the Kyuubi has somehow taken control of Naruto. Sarutobi finished for him. Both Junin nodded, causing the old man to sigh. I'm not ready to start jumping to such conclusions yet. Not until I've had a chance to see it for myself, at least. He let out another sigh and sat back down in his chair. He'd never felt so old before in his life. Do you have any idea where Naruto might be headed? Genma distractedly played with the Senbon needle in his mouth, pushing it from side to side with his tongue. We checked 6 of the 10 paths that the boy left, all of them coming up blank. The remaining 4 led east, northwest, southeast, and southwest. We have no borders to other countries to the east and southeast, so unless he took one of the western trails, he'll probably remain in the fire country. But if he did go west, he could be halfway to Suna to Iowa or anywhere in between by now, Rado pointed out. Sarutobi couldn't help but look miserable, realizing just how easily this could have all been avoided. But there was no sense dwelling on the past. Instead, he'd have to work on making Naruto's life more pleasant from here on out. Of course, he still needed to be found or else there'd be nothing to do for him. I'd like you and the others to use the rest of the day to continue searching for him. Search as fast as you can, because if he leaves the boundaries of our country, there won't be much we can do. If nothing is found by midnight, you'll have to return, as the other Junins will have to be here in the morning to meet their new Genin students. The two men saluted again and disappeared, leaving the Hokage alone again with nothing but his thoughts and a stack of business papers. Naruto. 5 days later, the search was officially called off. Uzumaki Naruto was nowhere to be found within the country of fire. The sun beat down mercilessly over the wide and desolate sands of the Wind Country, a part of the world that was so hot and dry that even cacti had trouble growing. The strong winds blew almost constantly, whipping up frequent and blistering sandstorms all across the horizon. And out in the middle of the barren wasteland, a single boy trudged onward. So damn hot. Naruto croaked through cracked lips and a very dry throat. So damn tired. The young blonde was currently moving at twice the speed of a large tortoise, sweating profusely and constantly having to tell himself that the ramen stand he kept seeing on the horizon was nothing but a mirage. He had unzipped his orange coat and pulled it over his head, offering himself the slightest bit of shade, but not doing anything in the way of escaping the heat. His green goggles were pulled over his eyes to protect them from the sand, but with the amount of sand being kicked around, he still couldn't see very far ahead of him. He felt like such an idiot. It had been 4.5 days since he'd fled from Konoha. Since then, he'd traveled aimlessly, not sleeping, not eating, not even paying attention to where he was going. He never stopped to think about it, but now that he was stranded deep in the heart of this desert, he couldn't understand just how he had managed to travel so far and so fast without much of a problem. There was a couple times where he'd find himself almost blacking out of sorts, but when he came back around to himself he'd notice that he was still running, like he'd been on autopilot. And while he ran, the Kyuubi had watched in silence. Since that night, the Kyuubi hadn't spoken to him again, though it was sure that Naruto still had it on his mind. Several times the Kyuubi could feel the boy reaching his limits, and would pump a little more of its own chakra into his body and allow him to keep going. It might have seemed odd to be constantly helping the boy like that, but if it got him further away from Konoha and the Hokage, he could spare it. However, the Kyuubi now had more important matters on its mind. They had first come across the massive ocean of sand around midnight, long before the sun had risen. It had been freezing then, but it was now mid-afternoon, and the boy was beginning to show signs of heatstroke, which was very worrisome for the fox. There weren't many things that he couldn't protect his host from. Poison he could neutralize, viruses and diseases were a little more difficult, but it was still no problem getting rid of them either. Unfortunately, there was nothing the demon fox could do in regards to regulating his host's body temperature, and that meant that if Naruto didn't find some shelter from the heat really quick, there would be severe problems. Boy, he said, hoping to get his attention. There was no answer. Hey, mortal, he shouted a little louder. Shut up, fox, Naruto panted. I'm not speaking to you. Don't be so stubborn, human. You need to get us out of this desert, or at least find some shade or something. Naruto growled. And just where would you like me to go, Baka Fox? He weakly swept his arms around to gesture towards the surroundings. There's nothing but sand, as far as I can see. Well, that's your fault for not paying attention to where you were running then, isn't it? The fox snarled. Look, If you don't get out of this sun real fast, we're both going to die. Yeah, so what? Naruto demanded. It's not like anybody is gonna miss either of us. That may be well and good for you, brat, but I'm not going to die here. Just shut up. I'm tired of. Naruto's vision began to blur. Hey, don't you dare pass out. Not gonna pass out, Naruto whispered half a second before falling face first into the scorching hot sand. And the QB was left uttering several loud obscenities. Hua, another boring mission. I stand off to the side and watch with the others while my little brother kills 18 armed A-rank ninja without even trying. And to think, 3 years ago I thought being a ninja would be a little more fun. These thoughts belong to a young teenage girl who was currently walking through the desert with 3 males, 2 of which were young, about her age, and another who was several years older. The girl wore a tight-fitting purple outfit with a skirt that ended slightly above her knees. Her blonde hair was pulled back into 4 short ponytails, and she was currently shielding herself from the rays of the sun with a giant fan held over her head. Off to her left was a boy dressed completely in black, looking completely unfazed by the blazing sun that was beating down on him. His face was covered in purple markings and he carried a large, bulging object wrapped in bandages on his back. In between them was a shorter boy with red hair and thick dark marks around his aquamarine-colored eyes. He was also carrying a large object on his back. In his case, it was a large sand-colored gourd. Although none of the travelers were looking particularly happy at the moment, this one seemed to give off an aura of hatred that made his companions want to not walk too close to him. Behind them walked the older man, who had 2 red lines along his right cheek and a white cloth pulled down over the left side of his face. We're only a few miles from Suna, the man informed them. Once we report to Cage-sama, I'd like the 3 of you to proceed to the training grounds. I'll meet with you there later to discuss our next mission. The girl and boy in black both nodded, while the redhead walked on like he hadn't heard a word the man had said. The girl silently went back to musing. It was great that they were receiving so many missions recently, but it was honestly getting more and more difficult to get excited about them anymore. She glanced over at her little brother. Ever since Gaara had become the official 3rd member to their team, it had felt like she'd barely been needed at all. She could have gathered information from enemies, but quite frankly, both Gaara, with his 3rd eye ability, and Kankuro, with his hidden and disguised puppets, were better at that than she. And planning. Oh sure, she was best qualified and would love to do it, but with Gaara on the team, who needed plans? All the boy had to do was find the target and they would all be dead, or tortured for information and then dead, without the slightest of efforts. She knew that Kankuro felt the same way about the lackluster parts that they played on missions. If it wasn't for the fact that they both needed to come along to calm Gaara from one of his mood swings, their younger brother could have done every single one of their missions to date by himself. It was infuriating and depressing, not to mention quite damaging to the Kunoichi's ego, to witness her youngest brother showing her up again and again. The redhead, Gaara, seemed to feel his sister's eyes on him and turned to her. What do you want? He said in what had to be called a growl. Temari felt that all too familiar chill run down her spine at the way her brother glared at her. Nothing. Just spacing out, I guess. She smiled reassuringly, hoping that he would buy it. At this stage in her life, she was pretty certain that her brother couldn't read minds, but one could never be too certain around him. Gaara just snorted and turned away, making Temari breathe a little easier. She really did love her brother. Unfortunately, he also scared the ever-living shit out of her, which made for a lot of possible counseling issues that she might have to look into one day. They all walked in silence for a few more minutes before Kankuro stopped abruptly. Hey, Baki-sensei, he said, catching the others' attention. Baki had already stopped as soon as Kankuro had, having almost walked right into him. What is it? Kankuro pointed off into the distance. That orange thing over there, it's not a mirage or something, is it? The others followed the direction that he was pointed, and through the swirling sand, all could make out the figure of what appeared to be a person lying face down in the sand. Should we go check, Baki-sensei? Temari asked. Why bother? Gaara questioned, sounding annoyed. It's probably just a corpse. Baki grimaced. It wouldn't do to just leave someone there if they're still alive. Temari, Kankuro, investigate, he commanded. The siblings nodded and took off. Gaara stared after them before walking off again. I'm not waiting for you then, he announced. Baki just watched his youngest student walk away before moving to catch up with the others. Upon reaching the fallen person, Temari knelt down and pulled off the orange jacket from over its head, revealing a young boy with untamed blonde hair, wearing a pair of green goggles over his eyes. She gently reached down and turned him to his back, being wary as his skin was already bright red, telling her that he had been there for at least an hour. What's the verdict? She heard her brother ask. The kunoichi placed 2 fingers to the boy's neck, feeling a faint but steady pulse. He's still alive, she confirmed. But he'd most likely suffering from sunstroke. We need to get him to a hospital if he's going to live. Lifting his head up and cradling it with her arm, Temari slowly pulled off the goggles from his eyes. The areas around his eyes were incredibly pale compared to the rest of his face, and there appeared to be several strange markings along the boy's cheeks, which she assumed were some sort of birthmark or something. Then the boy's eyes opened, and Temari got a good look at just how deep and blue they were. The boy had nice eyes, she decided. I see, an angel, he whispered faintly, a small goofy grin appearing on his face. Temari felt herself blush, then growled when Kankuro started laughing. Yeah, it's sunstroke all right. He's already delusional. Temari elbowed him in the stomach, making him crumple over in pain. Enough fooling around. You two, Baki commanded. If the boy is still alive, then we need to get him back to the village. Any idea where he's from? Temari shrugged. He's not wearing a shinobi headband. She shook the boy slightly, trying to get him to focus on her again. Hey kid, can you tell me where you're from? The boy seemed confused by the question, but then his eyes widened in fear, and the next thing Temari knew he was out of her arms and crouching down in an animalistic manner several feet away from her and the others. The 3 Suna shinobi tensed in surprise. C can't go back, he slurred, baring his teeth at them. W won't let. And then he collapsed again. The group didn't move for a few seconds, waiting to see if anything else would happen before Baki relaxed. He calmly walked over and scooped the boy up into his arms. Let's go, he said. The others nodded and followed shortly behind, the village of Sunagakure already coming into view over the sand dunes on the horizon. The next several hours went by in a blur for Uzumaki Naruto. He only managed to catch snippets of what was going on in that time as his body continued to lose battles against unconsciousness. For a while he could feel himself being carried by someone, though he couldn't bring his eyes to focus enough to make out who it was. Later, he found himself in a small room with several people in white standing around him. A couple of times he'd tried to ask what was happening and where he was, but no one seemed to know what he was saying. Still lost in confusion, he'd tried once to get up and run. He would have succeeded, but the moment he sat up a burst of pain flew through his entire body, causing him to black out again. At times when he was awake his body felt like it was on fire, but then there would be a cooling sensation, and the feeling that he had been submerged in water. After several processes of pain and soothing, the people in white began wrapping him in some kind of cloth. They placed him on something cushy, most likely a bed, and after one last sudden jab of pain in his arm, he was out again. Heatstroke. Second-degree burns over half of his body, first degree over the rest, disorientation and multiple bouts of unconsciousness brought on by lack of sleep, food and water. Quite frankly, Baki-san, I can't see how the boy is even alive, much less in such stable condition. Baki nodded, stroking his chin in thought. Any clues as to where he might be from? The young nurse shook her head. Nothing, sir. Although, he prodded. The woman glanced around the room as though she were afraid to continue, then spoke in a lowered voice. While cooling the boy's body, we discovered unusual markings on his stomach. It's not like anything that any one of us had ever seen, so there's no telling what it really is. The Junin frowned. I see. By any chance, is he alert enough to answer a few questions? We gave him a light painkiller a few hours ago and he's been sleeping since, she informed him. I can take you to his room, if you want. As they were leaving the front desk of the hospital, the front doors swung open and Temari and Konkuro walked in. I still don't see what the big deal is, Konkuro muttered grumpily. Temari turned to him with a scowl. Are you saying you're not even the least bit curious? We found a half-dead person out alone in the desert and you're not interested one bit about him. Should I be? He asked honestly. It's not like I know him or anything. Then go home, Temari said flatly. And be alone with Gaara when he's in one of his moods. Are you insane? Then quit bitching and come on. The two siblings followed their instructor and the nurse up to the third floor and entered one of the rooms. They found out very quickly that the boy was indeed very much alert. Hey you bastards! What the hell's going on here, huh? The boy shouted. He would have most likely been thrashing his bandaged arms and legs about in anger if they weren't strapped down to the sides of his bed. If you're trying to get me to talk, you're wasting your time. I won't say a thing no matter how much more you torture me. So there. He ended his tirade by blowing them a raspberry. There was a group blink among the four people in the doorway. I hate him already, Konkuro stated. The nurse calmly walked over to the bedside and opened the top drawer of a cabinet sitting next to it. When she pulled out a small scalpel, the boy literally freaked. Ah, I was just kidding. Don't torture me. I don't know anything, really. Please have mercy, I'm fragile. Temari was beginning to share her brother's opinion of the boy. He might have been amusing to her if he wasn't being so damn loud. Please relax, boy, the nurse told him. I'm only here to change your bandages. And please keep your voice down. There are other patients in this hospital, you know. The blonde looked ready to start shouting again when her words seemed to catch up with him. Hospital. That's right. Then, you're not here to torture me. No, sir, she assured him. Can I do it? Konkuro asked before receiving a small kick to the shin from Temari. Baki ignored the trade-off between the two siblings and moved to sit on a chair on the opposite side of the bed. Now then, boy, he started, drawing the boy's attention from the nurse as she started cutting through the cloth wraps on his arm. If you don't mind, there are a few questions that we need answered. The boy scrunched his face up in suspicion. Why should I have to tell you anything? I don't even know you, and I don't know where I am or anything. Why should I trust you? Baki took a deep breath, reminding himself that the boy did have a fairly good reason for being a little uptight. Very well, I suppose I can answer a few of your questions first, then. Temari and Konkuro moved forward, now a little more eager for some answers than before, while the boy looked on intently as the nurse continued stripping his bandages. You may call me Baki. These two, he gestured to the siblings, are a part of my genin team, Konkuro and Temari. You are currently in a hospital in Sunagakur. My team and I found you unconscious in the desert several hours ago. You were suffering from a severe heatstroke, so we brought you here for treatment. Now until you answer a few of our questions, I'm afraid that's all I'm able to tell you. So. The boy turned his eyes to the floor, remaining silent before letting out a tired sigh. I'm Uzumaki Naruto. Was from Konoha. Are you a shinobi? Baki asked. Well, not really. I mean, I want to be one, but I kept having bad luck with passing the genin exams. Baki thought about that. He wasn't a ninja, but if he had training experience already. I've got a question, Konkuro spoke up. What kind of idiot wanders around in a desert in the middle of the day? especially while wearing those thick and very ugly clothes. Naruto pointed and glared menacingly with his free hand. Shut up. At least I don't wear makeup. Temari stifled a chuckle as she grabbed the back of her brother's shirt, keeping him from throttling the boy. This is ritual face paint, you loudmouthed midget. Who are you calling a midget? Naruto shouted, trying his best to stand up despite his restraints. And I still say it looks like makeup. I'll have you know that there are very important meanings behind wearing this paint. Ahem. The two boys turned back to Baki, who was looking more than a little annoyed. Sorry, sensei, Kankuro mumbled while Naruto settled for grinning and scratching the back of his head in embarrassment. Now Uzumaki Naruto, the Junin continued. I believe that once you're sufficiently healed, you'll be able to return to Konoha. No. Everyone cringed at the force of Naruto's outburst. He lowered his head, staring down at the white sheets of his bed. Sorry, he said quietly. It's just that, I can't go back, ever. Temari and the rest of her team, and even the nurse could sense the pain and sadness resonating from the blonde. You were exiled? She asked cautiously. His expression darkened even more. I'd rather not talk about it, if you don't mind. Temari nodded in understanding, though inside she was growing even more curious about the boy before her. Something about him just seemed to draw her interest, in a way. It was almost like there was something familiar about him, but she couldn't figure what it might have been. Baki cleared his throat again. In that case, Naruto, you can take up refuge here in Suna for the time being. However, Suna and Konoha are joined through a mutual treaty, and if anyone were to come looking for you from Konoha, just know that there wouldn't be anything we could do for you, as it could violate the treaty. Naruto looked up at the man in astonishment. And since you're still a ninja in training, perhaps we can work things out with the cage to let you take our genin tests once you recover. We've been running a little low. Before he could finish, Naruto had flung himself out of the bed, completely ruining the straps that held him and terrifying the nurse who was trying to reapply his bandages, and clamped his arms tightly around the waist of the Junin. Do you mean it? He asked, tears threatening to spout from his eyes. I can still become a ninja. Yes, Baki said as calmly as he possibly could. But only if you let go of me right this second. Naruto instantly began bouncing all around the room, swinging his arms, kicking his feet, knocking random things over without a care, and singing, "Gonna be a ninja. Gonna be a ninja," at the top of his lungs. Uzumaki-san, stop that immediately. The nurse commanded, which Naruto didn't even hear. She frantically turned to Temari and Kankuro. Please stop him, he's not in any condition to be up. And the other patients, and... Oh, let me. Kankuro begged, waving his hand in the air like a student wanting to be called on by the teacher. Temari sighed and reached for her fan. Don't waste your energy. I'll do it. But, the puppet master tried to protest. Who's the big sister around here? She asked. Kankuro crossed his arms and pouted. You are, he mumbled. Naruto was too preoccupied with celebrating that he never felt the approaching danger until it hit him right on top of the head, sending him crashing to the floor. Before he could regain his equilibrium, he felt himself pulled back to his feet by his hair and looking into the teal eyes of Temari. What did you do that for? He whined, rubbing the small bump forming on his head. Because, you idiot, the kunoichi answered forcefully. You nearly died of sunstroke not even 6 hours ago. If you keep acting up like this you could still die, you know. But I'm excited, and I'm glad for you, but wait and be excited after you're healed, and get back into bed and rest now. But, bed, she ordered, jabbing a finger in the direction of the object in question. Much like a puppy who had just been scolded by its master, Naruto sulked back to the bed and pulled the covers up past his nose. Man, she's scarier than Sakura-chan. Man, what a pain. Kankuro growled. The three had left the hospital once everything had settled down again. Baki had gone his own way once they were out of the building, which left Temari alone to listen to her brother complain. We should have just listened to Gara in the first place. Oh, be nice, she reprimanded him. Sure, he's loud, but I think you're overreacting a little. Kankuro glanced at her from the corner of his eye and sneered. Well, of course you would think that, Angel. Temari couldn't keep herself from blushing. Shut up. He said that while he was half dead and he probably doesn't even know he said it. It's not like it matters. Then how do you explain the blush? I'm not blushing, she shouted, unconsciously growing even redder. Whatever, the puppet master chuckled, leaving Temari silently fuming. They walked on for a few more blocks, both praying to themselves that Gara wouldn't be in a bad mood over being alone at home for so long. By the way, Kankuro. What, Temari? What exactly is the special meaning behind that paint of yours? Quote. Shut up, Temari. What exactly are you asking of me, Baki? The large man kept his head bowed, and took a deep breath. This boy that was found yesterday, I would like to test his abilities as a shinobi. Should he pass my expectations, I humbly ask you to make him a ninja of Suna under my command, Kazekage-sama. It was next to impossible to judge the Kazecage's expression since all but his eyes were completely covered, but Baki could tell just by the narrowing of those eyes that the man was suspicious. Quote. And what makes this particular boy so special that I should allow such a thing? This boy is an outsider, someone we know nothing about. Who's to say that he's not a spy? Baki thought back to his earlier meeting with the rowdy child in the hospital and couldn't help but smirk. No village in their right mind would send someone like him on an espionage mission. It is uncertain as of now, sir, but it seems as thought the boy left his village in a great hurry. My team and I found him passed out in the middle of the desert with no additional food, clothing, or provisions of any sort. It is our belief that the boy may have been exiled. However, there could be another possibility. An unseen eyebrow was quirked by the Kazekage. And that would be. I trust you know the tale of the monster Kyubi no Yoko? Baki asked. The unexpected question caught the Yondaime off guard, but he recovered and nodded. It was a demon fox of near immeasurable power whom the Yondaime of Konoha sacrificed himself to seal away within the body of an infant 12 years ago. What relevance does that carry here? When Baki didn't respond, the Kazecage's eyes narrowed even further. You can't be thinking that he is that child, he demanded. Again, I can't be certain yet, Kazekage-sama, Baki admitted. But while at the hospital, an attendant informed me that they discovered markings on the boy's stomach which were unnatural looking. I haven't had the opportunity to see it myself yet, but there is still the possibility that those markings are the seal that binds the Kyubi. The Yondaime seemed taken aback by this declaration. What I saw today, sir, Baki continued in a lowered voice. In the desert, I'm positive of it. The boy was on the brink of unconsciousness, but for just the briefest of moments, he seemed to change, and I felt an evil force, a bloodlust the likes of which I've only felt in the past from Gara. The eyes of the Kazekage suddenly hardened. You want to unleash another monster like Gara on our village? Are you a fool? Baki shook his head. No, sir. Please don't misunderstand. This boy seems to be stable, much more controlled than Gara. I believe that with proper guidance and training, the boy can become a great asset to the land of Suna. It could be possible that he will surpass the abilities of Gara, himself. A feeling of foreboding sent a small chill through the Yondaime's body. The thought of another demon weighed heavily on his chest, but if they were able to succeed with this Uzumaki boy where they had failed with Gara tugged his thoughts in the other direction. Baki waited on pins and needles for the Kazekage to speak again. Finally, after a long and drawn-out silence. Test him. If he is deemed worthy, then I shall leave him to you. But heed my word now, Baki, if something goes wrong, I shall personally end your life. The Junin bowed his head again before vanishing. It was mid-morning and already Temari was bored. It seemed to be the case more often than not these days. She could usually keep herself busy with missions and training, but when there was a lack of the former and the rest of the team wasn't around for the latter, she would often find herself at a loss for what to do. Temari needed a new hobby, of that she was certain. Botany was fine, but could only hold her interest for so long. Kankuro, on the other hand, could spend hours every day tinkering with his puppets or going out and browsing for new parts and adapters that suited him. Gaara had his activities as well, though it also seemed that he could be completely content with doing nothing but sit on the roof all day and night. She knew for a long time now that she wasn't like most girls in the village. Where village girls and other kunoichi could be found all the time at the local clothing and beauty shops, Temari never really felt the need. Not to boast, but she looked just fine no matter what she wore, with or without makeup, if the occasional glances from passing boys were any indication. Of course none of that really mattered anyway, since it had been years since she'd had any real sort of interaction with any boys her age. Even if there were some who were man enough to overlook the fact that she was Gaara's sister, all of the male shinobi that were around her age were pathetically weak, and the one thing that Temari looked for in a prospective boyfriend was that he be able to keep up with her, either physically or mentally. But thinking like this did nothing but depress her. Sighing, she stood up from her bed and walked out of the room. She found the stairway that led up to the roof of their home. Opening the door, she was unsurprised to find Gaara sitting on the ledge of the roof, looking out over the village at nothing in particular. Gaara, she called as she moved to stand next to him. The redhead turned stiffly and leveled a flat stare at her. What do you want? He asked bluntly. Just wanted to let you know that I'm going out for a while, so you'll have the house to yourself until me or Kankuro get back, she told him casually as she crouched down a few feet away from him. The empty stare didn't waver. Fine. Temari mentally drooped. She had been trying since she was 8 years old to get Gaara to come out of his shell and open up to her a little more, thinking that maybe if he did that he might gain a little bit of stability to his life. Years later, however, it seemed that such a thing was a lost cause. She decided to try again, anyway. Have you eaten yet? She asked. I can bring something back for you. Gaara turned back to gazing out at nothing. Nothing sweet. Temari smiled. Sure thing. She stood back up and, on an afterthought, reached over and ruffled the boy's hair a little. Unfortunately, the unexpected contact caused him to flinch and a thin veil of sand began appearing around his body. Temari immediately pulled her hand back as though it had almost been bitten by a cobra. Her friendly, big sister mask slipped and was replaced by one of sadness mixed with fear. Sorry, she whispered. I'll be back later, okay. Then, not waiting for a response, she jumped from the roof and didn't look back until she was more than a block away. Gaara was still not looking at her. For a while, Temari simply wandered the streets of the village with no set destination in mind. She eventually reached an area of town that served chilled soba, which was quite a hit with the inhabitants of the desert town. Stopping at the stand, she ordered an native bowl, then ordered a special bowl for Gaara. It cost her most of the pocket money she'd brought, but Gaara, unfortunately, had some expensive tastes. Better safe than sorry, she always said. As she walked back to the house, she walked by the hospital and happened to remember the boy from yesterday, Uzumaki Naruto, if she remembered correctly. She stared down at the small wrapped box in her hand, then up at the building in front of her, then back down again. Ah, what the heck? She decided. 10 minutes shouldn't hurt. I just hope Gaara isn't starving. A door cracked open, and an eyeball could be seen peeking through the opening. It looked left, then right, then up and down, before finally determining that there were no ambushes waiting on the other side. Slowly, the door creaked open further and a heavily bandaged boy slunk into the hallway. He hadn't taken 2 steps when he heard someone coming. In a flash, he was crouched down underneath a metal gurney with a long white sheet pulled down to conceal him from the approaching person. It had seemed like a wise move, until he realized that the person was now starting to push the gurney down the hallway, forcing him to crawl on hands and knees along with it so as not to be exposed. Moving in such a way was no easy feat while so heavily wrapped to begin with, but with the repeated zigging and zagging through various hallways that the gurney was going in, he had to believe that the person either had no idea where he was going, or already knew that he was under there and was punishing him for leaving his room. When it finally stopped and the man began walking away, he cautiously raised the sheet and glanced out. Everything seemed to be clear again. Now all he had to do was figure out where in the building he was and find the exit before anyone noticed that his room was empty. Uzumaki Naruto grinned at his small measure of victory. And people said he couldn't cut it as a ninja. Ha, well screw them. Here he was, trapped and isolated deep within enemy lines, and already he was practically home free. No one would be able to stop him now. Going somewhere. He froze. That voice seemed familiar for some reason. Very slowly, he turned around. Oh crap, he said before he could stop himself. It was that scary girl from the night before, standing directly in front of him, arms crossed, foot tapping, and a not so friendly sort of glint in her eye. Not good. Well, the girl in question prompted. Naruto swallowed hard. Bathroom. The girl quirked an eyebrow in skepticism, which sent a shiver through Naruto's body. It was insane. He hadn't known the girl for more than an hour total and already she scared him more than any girl he'd ever known back home. Granted, aside from Sakura, he really hadn't known any of the other girls all that well anyway. You wouldn't be planning on leaving the hospital before you're completely healed, would you? She asked in a voice that was way too casual sounding to be sincere. But I am healed, he insisted, flexing his arms as if to prove it. I'm feeling fine, I'm a really fast healer. Not that fast, you're not, she replied. You were 10 feet from death's door when we found you yesterday, and let me tell you something, kid. She reached over and placed her hand firmly on his shoulder. I'm not always known for doing favors for people. So when I actually go out of my way to help somebody, that somebody better damn well appreciate what I've done for them and not do something stupid that might make me regret helping them in the first place. Do you understand? Naruto nodded adamantly. Absolutely. Temari, was it? The girl looked slightly surprised that he'd remembered her name, but nodded nonetheless. I really appreciate you helping me and everything, but I swear I'm all better now. And I have to go train more so I can still become a genin, because if I don't, then. Naruto, Temari interrupted calmly. Do you see this large fan on my back? Naruto blinked at the odd question. He examined the long black fan carefully. What about it? How much do you suppose it weighs? 50 pounds. He guessed. 55 actually, but close enough, she said. Now then, do you have any idea what I might possibly use this big, heavy fan for? Naruto was beginning to sweat, which had nothing to do with the fact that the hospital wasn't air-conditioned. Keeping yourself cool. Actually, Temari said, pulling out a much smaller paper fan from her pocket. That's what I use this fan for. And if you don't get back in that room and stay there until the doctors tell you otherwise, I'm going to use this fan to make sure you stay there even longer. Alright. With no other alternative than to surrender, Naruto grudgingly was led back to his room by the fellow blonde. Once he was back in his bed, she set Gaara's box of noodles on the table next to the bed and took a seat beside it. Good boy, she said, patting him softly on the head. She got a small chuckle out of the sour look he gave her in return. I'm not a dog, you know, he grumbled. And what are you doing back here anyway? Temari sniffed and leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms and legs. I was in the area and thought I'd see how you were, okay. It's not like you'll end up with any real visitors out here in Suna, right? Naruto grimaced and turned his head away, making Temari feel that she must have struck a sore spot for the boy. She didn't say anything, however, and the moment passed in an awkward silence. So then, tell me about yourself. Naruto turned back to face her, disbelief written all over his face. Nani? Tell me about yourself, she repeated. His shock grew. You want to know about me? Why not? She questioned. Considering the circumstances of how we met, can you blame me for being a little interested in you? Of course, Temari was already beginning to get a fairly decent picture of the boy. Just by his reactions to things that Shirobaki-sensei had said to him led her to believe that he was either some sort of outcast or just someone whom nobody wanted to associate with. Now she just wanted to know why. There's really not that much to tell, he said softly. Not much to tell, or not much that you want to tell? She probed. Naruto felt his hands tighten on the sheets of his bed. This wasn't something he wanted to deal with. Talking like this was forcing him to remember, and that was the last thing he wanted to do. He just wanted to forget about Konoha, forget about Iruka-sensei and the old man and Sakura-chan and that jerk Sasuke and everyone else. He just wanted to be able to forget the past and move on with his life, but he'd never be able to do that if he had to keep reliving those painful memories every time he met someone new who wanted to know about his life. Can we please just talk about something else? He asked, trying to make it sound like he wasn't pleading. Temari studied his face for several seconds, then sighed. All right, fine, but I do want to know just one thing first. Naruto tensed. What's that? The girl stared him directly in the eyes. Were you actually exiled for some reason, or did you just decide to leave? I don't really care about the reasons behind it, but if you're some sort of criminal or something, then I might have something to say about that. So, the blonde boy could feel his knuckles aching from clenching the sheets so tightly. I wasn't exiled. I just couldn't stay there anymore. And that's when Temari figured out where she'd been reminded of this boy before. It must have been hard for you, being all alone in a place where no one cares about you. Naruto seemed to nod before he realized what she'd just said. Then his eyes widened in shock. Wha? I mean, how'd? She gave him a melancholy smile. I've seen that expression on your face more times in my life than I can count. If there's one thing I'm an expert at, it's spotting the symptoms of someone who's gone through life unloved. You've got all the signs and then some. Naruto was completely flabbergasted. You mean, you? Temari waved him off with a flick of her wrist. It's not me, if that's what you're thinking. But enough about that, you answered my question so we can change the subject now, right? Naruto was actually finding himself no longer wanting to change the subject, but while he could admit to being a little dense sometimes, he wasn't so thick that he couldn't tell that Temari no longer wanted to discuss the issue, so he let it go for now. Stretching his face into his signature fox-faced grin, he said, so that brother of yours, does he buy his own makeup or just use yours? So caught off guard was Temari that she nearly fell off her chair. For as long as she could remember, no one in Suna ever commented on Konkuro's face paint, most likely because they were smart and feared what might befall them if they did. Still, she couldn't help but laugh. You're something else, kid. Though with that kind of talk you probably won't last long out here in Suna. Naruto flung his sheets back and stood up boldly on his bed. That's what you think. I'll be the greatest ninja that Suna has ever seen. Just you wait and see. Temari raised her eyebrows and snorted at the declaration. Cocky, are we? Suna's not known for its pushovers, you know. Naruto threw his fist into the air. So what? Bring 'em on. I swore that I'd one day become the greatest Hokage ever and earn the admiration of everyone in the village. And I never break my vow, that's my nindo. But you're not in Konoha anymore, Temari said bluntly. Naruto instantly deflated, but the kunoichi didn't even have time to think about apologizing before he was standing straight up with his arm outstretched once again. Then I'll just have to alter my vow, and become the greatest Kazekage in all of history, instead. Stars were beginning to fill his eyes at this point. And then I can go back to Konoha and tell those villagers, ha ha. I bet you wish you hadn't been such big assholes to me now, huh? And then they'll all say, Oh Naruto, how could we have been so foolish? Please forgive our stupidity and be our new Hokage. And then I'll become the first ever Kase Hokage. He closed his eyes and stroked his chin thoughtfully, nodding in agreement with his own wisdom. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm gonna do. Temari could do nothing more than stare. Had she really just compared this guy to Gaara? She must have been out of her mind. Naruto plopped back down on his bed, grinning like a child who'd found his Christmas presents before they'd even been wrapped. So what's your goal, Temari Nichan? Temari again found herself caught completely off guard. Whether it was from the question itself or the way he'd referred to her, she wasn't sure, but she made a mental note to stop letting her guard down while around him. Well, now that you mention it, she said slowly. I guess I haven't thought much about anything long term. And she really hadn't. Besides making sure she gained Junin or possibly Anbu status before either of her brothers, she didn't have many other goals. Faced with this new conundrum, she placed her hand on her chin and gazed at the floor in thought. Naruto sat patiently, waiting to hear what she had to say, when he suddenly took notice of the smell of food in the room. It was a familiar sort of smell coming from the small box that Temari had brought. Had she brought that for him? If so, it would have been a small blessing, as he'd barely been able to stomach the food that the nurses had brought for him earlier. And if he was right about the smell? Oh please, let him be right. Temari growled in frustration. For the first time in her life she'd realized that she had no idea what she intended to do with her life outside of being a ninja. Damn, now this was depressing. Ew, she heard. This ramen is all cold and weird looking. Gross. She frowned. That's not ramen, baka. It's so oh my god you're eating Gaara's lunch. She screamed in wide-eyed horror. Naruto, with bowl and chopsticks in hand, and a single noodle hanging limply from his lips, blinked. Nani. 1 week ago had marked the day that the fox demon carrier, Uzumaki Naruto, had left the village. What followed the days after had been scenes of scattered celebration among the villagers. It was never anything too obvious, but you didn't have to be a top-ranked Junin to notice the air of happiness that had risen from all over Konoha. People stayed out to all hours of the night in bars, drinking and laughing over the fact that they could all finally live in peace again. No more would they have to put up with that demon brat's antics, having to fear for the lives of themselves and their families that he would go on a killing spree at any given moment, and finally start enjoying their lives. This was the general consensus, anyway. But there was a significant amount of people who failed to share the joy of the others. For one, the owner of the Ichiraku ramen stand and his daughter were already starting to see the beginning of hard times. It had been well known that Naruto had always been their best customer, but even they didn't realize just how great he had been for them. Since Naruto's departure, they hadn't even been making a quarter of the amount that they'd used to. They hadn't had many other regulars before, but now it seemed like people were avoiding the place altogether, as if going there might somehow bring the boy back. Even worse was the case with Hyuga Hinata. Every one of the members of the Hyuga family could see a distinct difference in her. Where she had been a below-average ninja in their eyes before, she was now downright terrible. Her sparring matches against her sister Hanabi never lasted any longer than a minute, her focus was completely off, and she seemed to have lost all motivation in even being a shinobi. None of them even considered the connection between her skill downfall and the disappearance of the fox carrier, and so were trying to find anything to point their fingers at that might be the cause. A few concluded that it must be the genin team that she had been put in. Perhaps her teammates were somehow clouding her judgment, or her sensei wasn't pushing her hard enough. Others questioned the actions of Hiashi. The Hyuga clan was not known as a very affectionate bunch, but some of the more sympathetic members felt that it was Hiashi's overbearing harshness toward his daughter that had led to the loss of any confidence she might have once had. These comments were met with open disdain from the head of the Hyuga clan, as he claimed that he had treated Hinata no differently than Hanabi, and she was turning out just fine. If anything, The last week had caused Hiyashi to become even colder to his eldest daughter. The disappointment and scorn that he had shown in the past was now in full force, so much so that Hanabi had started going out of her way to try comforting her, though no matter how much she tried she couldn't get Hinata to open up and say what was really bothering her. Her team had tried similar tactics with similar results. Not even Kurenai could figure out a way to bring Hinata out of her depression. And as the days went on, the Genjutsu expert was beginning to seriously doubt Hinata's future as a shinobi. At the foot of the Hokage monument, Iruka sat staring downheartedly up at the stone faces. He'd been there for a few hours now, coming just as soon as classes had ended, just like he'd been doing for days. Villagers and shinobi alike knew not to bother with him at times like this, which was why he was rather surprised to hear the sound of approaching footsteps behind him. He shifted himself to face the newcomer. Iruka, the man greeted. Iruka grimaced. It seemed it was that time again. Good afternoon, Hokage-sama, he said flatly. Sarutobi moved over to stand next to Iruka, leaning heavily on his walking staff. He let out a groan as he lowered himself into a seated position. Iruka began absently playing with one of his kunai, twirling it on his finger and then scrapping at the ground with it. Several minutes went by in silence before Iruka couldn't take it any longer. Is there something you wanted from me, Hokage-sama? Sarutobi took several puffs of his pipe, and then blew a small smoke ring straight up into the air. You're doing it again, Iruka. Doing what, sir? You know what, Iruka, the old man told him. You're blaming yourself for something that isn't your fault. Just like you did before. How can I not blame myself, Hokage-sama? Iruka demanded, driving his kunai into the cement next to him. If I had just let go of my stupid hate for what Naruto had inside of him and started acknowledging Naruto himself, this might not have happened. The scar-faced Chunin stared at the deep crack created by his weapon and breathed a heavy sigh. There were so many things that I could have done differently for him. Sarutobi shook his head. There were plenty of things that all of us could have done, Iruka, including myself. But sir, nobody in this entire village really took Arashi-sama's words to heart, you see, he interrupted. Naruto was meant to be the hero of Konoha for being used as a sacrificial container without even given a choice. Instead, everyone who didn't outright scorn the boy simply ignored him altogether. I wasn't much different, I'm afraid. Iruka remained silent, signifying Sarutobi to continue. I think back now, when Naruto first left that orphanage, I shouldn't have allowed him to live on his own. If I had simply taken him in myself, or possibly found someone else who would be willing to do the same, how much better would he have turned out? He could have gotten the attention and guidance that he so desperately needed. The two fell into silence again. Isn't there anything more we can do? Iruka wondered out loud. Sarutobi shrugged. We've already concluded that Naruto is no longer within the boundaries of the Fire Country. The odds of finding him anywhere else at this point are all but non-existent unless some word of him reaches us. We also can't forget that there are other people outside of our village who know about the Kyuubi. If someone were to find Naruto and discover what he is, well, I'm sure you don't need to be told what could happen then. But can't we? Sarutobi held his hand up to silence him. However, there is one thing that we can do. The Sandaime paused again, taking another long puff of his pipe. Iruka was getting the feeling that the Hokage was doing it on purpose to torture him, but he held his tongue. Currently, we are bound through a signed peace treaty with Sunagakur and the Land of Wind. The chances that Naruto is actually in the Wind Country are slim, but if I were to send an envoy to the Yondaime cage, perhaps he will agree to send a search team for us. The look of renewed hope on Iruka's face was enough that Sarutobi hated to finish his thoughts aloud. After all, even if Naruto had ended up in the Land of Wind, there was no telling if he would be in Suna, what condition he would be in, or even if he was still alive. Chances were just as likely that he'd ended up in the Land of Rain, Sound, or even Earth, which would cause serious problems given the general relationships they shared. He also had to think of a convincing story to give to the Kazekage, who no doubt would decline sending his shinobi out to search for one missing boy unless there was a very good reason for it. Forcing himself back to his feet, Sarutobi grasped his staff and glanced back up at the monument. I'll send someone out at dawn tomorrow. Thank you, Hokage-sama, Uruka said, giving him a deep bow of gratitude. The Hokage chuckled. You make it sound like I'm only doing this because you want me to, Uruka. I certainly can't speak for everyone else, but I honestly believe that it's been far too quiet around here this past week. Uruka nodded. I agree, Hokage-sama. You idiot. Are you trying to get me killed? Temari shouted in manic hysteria while furiously shaking Naruto by the front of his orange jacket. I don't know what you're talking about. Naruto cried, forcing out one word at a time with each forward snap of his neck. Temari managed to calm down enough to stop shaking the boy, but still kept a tight grip on him. That soba you ate was lunch for my brother, Gaara. I promised him I'd bring food home for him, and if I don't he's gonna. She shivered just imagining what he might do. Naruto struggled unsuccessfully in breaking away from her. Frankly, he was now at a loss. Just as he was starting to think the girl was an okay person to be around, she now looked like she was ready to throw him out a window. The fact that his room had no windows made him even more worried. Don't you think you're overreact? I'm not overreacting, she screamed. There's no such thing as overreacting when it concerns Gaara. He's cruel, ruthless, bloodthirsty, and those are his better qualities. I don't even have enough money with me to buy him anything else. She gave him several more rough shakes. Why'd you have to eat it? I'm sorry. I thought it was for me, honest. Why would you think that? Temari questioned, still looking halfway delirious. Naruto began poking his index fingers together, looking about to pout. Well, you brought it here and set it down next to me and it smelled really good. Heaving a mighty sigh of despair, Temari dropped him to the floor, fell onto the bed and buried her face into a pillow. Naruto briefly entertained the idea of running while she wasn't looking, but changed his mind. Even if she was scary, and quite possibly a little unstable, he still couldn't just leave with her upset like this. But, just to be safe. Temari felt like crying, and if it wasn't for basic pride and the fact that she had never openly cried in her life, she probably would have. How could she possibly express to the boy just how much danger she could very well be in over something that would appear so insignificant to anyone who didn't know Gaara? There were only a few simple rules for someone like Temari to live by. Those were, don't piss off Gaara, and if for some reason you do piss off Gaara, do everything in your power to make things better. She had promised food for Gaara, and now she had none. This was going to piss off Gaara. She had no money and so was unable to buy him anything else. This was not going to help make things better. Temari was screwed. Unless. She heard and felt the bed move as Naruto sat himself down next to her. You know, Temari Nichan, I'm pretty sure it's not as bad as you think. I mean, I don't have a brother, but if I did have one, and he let someone eat my lunch, I don't think I'd be that mad. Well, maybe if it had been my limited edition premium blend ramen that I'd been saving for special occasions I'd probably beat him up, but. Temari had never really been listening to him in the first place, just staring at him as she mulled her idea around in her head. It was certainly cruel and not something she very much wanted to do, but as the old shinobi slogan went, there are a lot of times when you must do things you don't want to if you hope to survive. And Temari really wanted to survive. To believe that he'd be so upset over this, ya know. Naruto continued, completely unaware that Temari hadn't heard a word he'd been saying. And besides, if you just tell him it was a misunderstanding, he'll understand, right? Maybe, Temari answered flatly. But I have a different idea than telling Gaara what happened. Naruto blinked. Oh, yep, she said with a nod. I'm going to have you tell him, instead. Naruto rubbed his chin. Ah, well, I guess that's what. Why not? You're the one who ate it without asking, after all. Naruto began edging himself away from her until he slipped off the bed, then continued to slide back until his back was pressed against the wall. But why you said he was cruel, ruthless and unstable. And bloodthirsty, Temari reminded him. So why are you trying to make me tell him if he's that bad? He asked. Temari shrugged. Better you than me, I suppose. Besides, you seem to keep forgetting that it's your fault. Why should I take the blame for you? Naruto gulped as he watched the blonde reach for her fan. But you're his sister. He'll be nicer to you if you do it. Temari snorted. Yeah, that would be the day. Sorry Naruto, but I'm really left with no other options. It's either you take your punishment like a man, or my brother gets grumpy and rains terror and destruction upon me and the rest of Suna. Now are you going to do the right thing willingly, or do I have to hog-tie you and deposit you at my brother's feet? Naruto's sweat dropped hard. Can I just say something? It's not going to change my mind, but what is it? I have money. I don't. What? Naruto shakily pulled out a small green frog-shaped wallet and held it up for Temari to see. Hey, you can have some if you want. For a second, Temari didn't respond at all. Then before he even knew it, Naruto was again being lifted off the ground by his shirt and the money pouch had been ripped from his hand. You dumbass. Why didn't you mention that before? I was having a conniption here, damn it. The blonde boy attempted to apologize, but suddenly felt his body shifting into a different position. It took him a moment to realize what it was. Temari was now hugging him, apparently out of sheer relief. This is great, she cried. Now Gaara won't even have to know and no one has to die. Too tight, Naruto squeaked out, right before disappearing in a puff of smoke, leaving Temari clutching at nothing in his absence. The kunoichi stared in shock at the place where Naruto had just been standing. She looked all around the room, but saw no trace of him. Then she noticed something even more disturbing. The money pouch had disappeared along with him. Meanwhile, the real Uzumaki Naruto had just about reached the front door of the hospital. Thank Kami for Kage Bunshin, he thought to himself. When Temari had first started freaking out about him eating the soba, he'd felt that it was definitely time to leave. So the moment Temari had buried her face in that pillow and taken her attention off of him, he'd created a clone and silently slipped out the door. Of course, he'd stayed just outside so he could still hear where the conversation would end up going. If she had calmed back down, then he would have gone back inside. But when he heard her talking about handing him over to her unstable brother, he felt the time was right for a strategic retreat. Whatever happened after that didn't matter, just so long as he got away before she noticed. Man, just when I think I have people figured out, he muttered as he pushed open the door. He had only taken a single step outside when he felt the building shake from a terrifying roar that sounded a lot like someone screaming, Uzumaki. The fox boy shuddered. Damn. Kankuro walked along the sandy Suna road at a leisurely pace. A large sack was slung over his shoulder, and a small white box was gripped in his hand. Today was turning out just great. He'd managed to find the perfect piece needed to upgrade Karasu. He hadn't had to mess with his deranged brother or his bossy sister all day, and he'd made 4 children run away in fear just by walking up to them and saying, "Boo." Life was good. Reaching into his box, he pulled out a stick of yakitori and began munching on it happily, completely oblivious to the world around him. So oblivious, in fact, that he barely managed to move out of the way as an orange blur ran by him. Looking back, Kankuro saw the blur leap up onto a rooftop and continue on his way as though he were being chased by hellhounds. Little punk, he grumbled. You just feel lucky that you caught me in a real good mood, alright? Whatever Kankuro might have done was lost to the world, however, as at that moment a second person ran by. This time he wasn't able to move in time and the two collided. Kankuro sat up and snarled. Damn it all. Doesn't anybody look where they're going anymore? I've got the right mind too. Temari. The puppet master's sister sat up as well, rubbing her lower back slightly. Sorry, Kankuro, but did you see that boy go by here? Kankuro blinked in confusion. Could we be any less specific, please? Temari scowled at him. You know, Naruto, the one from yesterday. I can't let him. She trailed off as she noticed a small white box lying on the ground beside her. She opened the top and her eyes widened. A gift from heaven, she cried. She snatched the box up and ran off, not even caring if she found Naruto again or not. Hey, that's my lunch, Temari. Kankuro called as he gathered his stuff up and gave chase. Naruto continued on through the village, not certain but also not wanting to look if Temari was still after him. Instead, as he bounded from rooftop to rooftop, he pondered about his current situation. He figured that his best bet was to leave sooner before he attracted any more negative attention to himself. The last thing he needed was a repeat of Konoha. It was a shame though, Temari and her makeup-wearing brother and their sensei hadn't seemed so bad yesterday, but if they were to find out what he was. So his mind was made up, he would leave and try to start again in a new village, possibly a normal village where he wouldn't have to worry about ninja coming after him. Then he'd create his own training routine and become super powerful and he could be the village guardian against invaders and dangerous creatures. Yeah, that could work. Maybe it wasn't Hokage, but at least he'd be loved and respected. But he still faced a problem. How was he going to get out of here? The village was in the middle of the desert, and the last time he tried traveling through the desert he'd almost died. Maybe he could find a guide, or a large tank of water that he could carry with him. Risking a look behind him, he noticed that the fan wielder was nowhere to be seen, which made him relax a little. At least now he could work out a plan in peace. Just as he kicked off from another building, he turned back to face forward. Warning senses perked up within him as he saw that there was someone standing on the roof that he was headed toward. In fact, he was going to land on top of him at this angle. Hey, watch out, he shouted to the red-headed boy. The boy didn't move or even look like he's heard him. Panicked, Naruto began flailing his arms and legs around in a vain attempt to change his mid-flight course. When he realized it wasn't helping, he squeezed his eyes closed and awaited the impact. When the impact did come, it wasn't anything like Naruto thought it might have felt. Instead of colliding with a relatively soft body of another human, he felt a much more forceful contact, like he'd jumped into a cement wall or something. The force of the collision dizzied the blonde, causing him to fall hard onto his backside. He shook his head a little to clear his vision, but found himself staring at something peculiar, to say the least. Sand? He questioned in disbelief. But it was true, there really did seem to be a small wall of sand before him that most certainly hadn't been there a second ago. Hesitantly, he reached forward to touch it, but pulled back as the wall crumbled away to nothing and he found himself staring up into the pale face of the boy he's almost hit. Naruto jumped back to his feet, rubbing his slightly sore face as he studied the boy before him. The boy might have looked a bit comical if he didn't have such a mean look on his face. He didn't seem to have any eyebrows, but he did have some sort of thick, dark rings all around his eyes, making Naruto think of a panda, or a raccoon or something. The two boys stared at one another in silence, one with a piercing glare, the other with an apologetic grin. Sorry about that, Naruto said, rubbing the back of his head in embarrassment. I wasn't really looking where I was going, and I didn't see you there, so my bad, okay. The redhead continued glaring, making Naruto all the more uncomfortable. Something about this guy seemed to make his skin crawl. Are you here to help me prove my existence? The boy asked. Naruto tilted his head in confusion. What does that mean? The boy reached up and pulled the cork from the giant gourd on his back. Sabaku Q. Suddenly, sand began pouring from the mouth of the gourd, and before Naruto knew what to make of it, the sand had snaked itself through the air and began wrapping itself around his body. Hey, what's happening? He cried, struggling to break free. Let go of me. But it was no use, as the last thing Naruto saw before the sand consumed his entire body was the gleam of evil in the eyes of the boy. As Naruto struggled to break out of his prison, the Kyuubi stirred. Lifting its head, the fox inhaled deeply. It had long ago managed to block out the rancid stench of decay and mold from the sewers that it was trapped in, but now a new, yet more familiar scent was reaching him. A feral chuckle that could have easily been misinterpreted as a snarl escaped the Kyuubi's throat. So, you're that one. Hey, weak as ever, I see. No fun for me here. And with that being said, the Kyuubi laid its head down and went back to sleep. Gaara was doing his own evil laughing as he slowly raised the fool trapped in his Sabaku Q higher up into the air. It would be much more entertaining and enjoyable for him if everyone in the village were to see the slaughter that he was about to perform with their own eyes. It had been almost 3 days since the last time he had taken life from this village. It wouldn't do to have anyone forget that he was still among them. The voice within him growled at him to hurry up and kill the boy. There was no sense in adding needless suspense to it. Fear was one thing, but blood was what it truly desired at the moment. Gaara pushed the voice away. The casket of sand was now a good 50 above the rooftop, giving a good view to anyone who happened to turn their eyes to the sky. A gleam appeared in his eyes. Once again, he would see the sands of Sunagakur stained red with the blood of one of its own. He began clenching his hand into a fist. Sabaku. And then he stopped. Something seemed odd. The sand that held his prey seemed to be expanding. Even from that high up, Gaara would see that the blob of sand was growing in size. But why? Could it have been that his prey was fighting back? That thought sent a shiver of pleasure up the boy's spine. How long had it been since his prey had fought back? Too long, much too long. This was wonderful. Perhaps he could finally have fun. Lowering his hand, Sabaku no Gaara watched on, waiting to see exactly what would happen next. Temari and Kankuro walked along back toward their home, the former humming cheerfully to herself, the latter sporting a large bump that was visible even through his black hood. Why didn't you just tell me you needed it for Gaara? He grumbled. I told you it was a matter of life and death, she retorted. You still didn't have to use your stupid fan. You don't see me whipping out Karasu every time I want to prove a point. That's because you hate the thought of me smashing up your little toys. And don't think that I never notice when you use him to chase after those kids who play down the street from us. What I do in my free time is my business, and you've completely missed my point. He shouted, shoving his hands deep into his pockets. And you owe me lunch, too. Temari grinned despite herself. Suddenly, it was like the last hour of her life hadn't even happened. Everything was back to normal again. By all accounts, that was probably a good thing. Then, as a stray cloud passed in front of the sun, she happened to look up. Oh shit, she swore. Kankuro glanced at her in surprise. What's wrong? She pointed upward, and he followed her gaze up to the sphere of sand floating high up in the air. Oh shit, he concurred. Why already? We just got back from that mission. He should be satisfied for a week at most. Temari remained silent, but was thinking the same thing. After Gaara killed enough, he usually didn't kill again for several days. And it had only been 2 days ago when he had single-handedly massacred close to 20 shinobi. That should have been enough to sat his bloodlust for a week at least, just as her brother had said. The only option would have been if someone had somehow provoked or angered Gaara. God, she hoped that wasn't it. If it was, then it was most likely her fault for taking so long with his food. Was the imminent death of whoever that innocent person was resting on her shoulders? Temari. Kankuro. The siblings turned to the source of the voice, not surprised to see Baki running toward them. You saw it too, huh? Kankuro asked, even though it wasn't so much a question as it was a statement. Baki nodded. Any idea who it is or why Gar is killing again so soon? They both shook their heads, though they both subconsciously glanced down at the box in Temari's hand. Baki let out a distressful sigh. Nothing we can do then except wait for him to calm back down. While Baki and Kankuro kept their eyes focused on the floating sand, Temari diverted her eyes to the ground. She, herself, had already killed several times in her life, but it had always been during missions, against people who knew how to defend themselves. Somehow, watching Gara do the same, no, even worse things to innocent people like this would almost make her feel ill. She waited, not sure what for, just some sort of signal that the carnage might be over. What she got was a noise of interest and confusion from Kankuro and Baki. Curious, she looked back up just in time to see the sand explode. Only this time, unlike every other time she had seen it, the sand had exploded outward rather than inward. And what she saw after that was, "Oh, my God," she uttered. "What in Suna's name?" Baki demanded. That disgusting orange color," Kankuro said, mouth fully agape. "Don't tell me." Gara's eyes widened in wonder as the sky above him began overflowing with orange-clad people. 2, 8, 19, 37, 71, 115, and still they kept pouring out until finally he couldn't keep up with counting anymore. They landed all around him, on the roof with him, on the surrounding roofs, all along the streets between them. When the last clone landed, Gara felt himself resembling a small island within an ocean of orange. One of the Narutos stepped forward, breathing deeply and visibly sweating from the exertion of creating so many clones. He faced Gara, bearing his longer than average canines at him. "I've had a lot of crap happen to me in my life," he informed the Sand Nin. "Especially in the last week alone. But something like this, don't think I'm gonna just let this go. I don't know what your problem with me is, but if it's a fight you're looking for, then I'll be more than happy to kick your raccoon-eyed ass." If Gara felt any intimidation at the challenge at all, he hid it incredibly well. In fact, he was grinning from ear to ear, and not in a very friendly way. "I think I'm really going to enjoy killing you," he said. Naruto and every single one of his clones cracked their knuckles. "Just try it."